přišli na vernisáž kolektivu Tracing Spaces Stop and Go, Notes of Transformation and Transition. Já jsem Karolína Plášková, já jsem to pomáhala produkovat tu výstavu, takže teď řeknu to nezbytné informace, abychom všechny ocenili a pak vám řekneme něco k obsahu výstavy a uděláme krátkou a rychlou, možná další, nevím, komentovanou prohlídku. Tak jenom jsem chtěla říct, že vlastně ta výstava se stala díky iniciativě Fakulty architektury Vysokého učení technického, ještě teda pod teď už nesloužícím děkanem Janem Kristkem. A vlastně jsme oslovili rakouský kurátory Michala Zinganela a Michala Hieslmaira, aby tady představili ten svůj výzkumný projekt, na kterým pracovali v minulosti. A ještě musím poděkovat dalším lidem, kteří přispěli k tomu, že se to tady podařilo dát dohromady. I have to thank also other people who helped us to realize this event. It was the team of Michal and their helpers Viola Reš and Ruslan Dimov and Daniel Bamberger. Thank you everyone that you are still here. And other helpers from the faculty, Eva Truncová, Lucie Zádrapová a Adela Šoborová. And of course Jan Kristek, who covered everything and all the problems as well. A ještě and back to Czech for a while. Ještě musíme poděkovat finanční podpoře, kterou přidělilo Ministerstvo kultury, město Brno, Státní fond kultury a Česká komora architektů. A událost se odehrává pod záštitou brněnské primátorky Markéty Vaňkové. Takže děkujeme všem. A teď předám slovo Honzu Kristkovi, aby vám řekl, díky čemu se to vlastně všechno stalo. Nevím, něco řekni.
Okay, so I'll switch to English because I'm going to introduce also the curators and also authors of the exhibition, which is Michal Zinganel and Michal Hieslmair. I guess this cooperation started already a decade ago, thanks to Michal Zinganel, whom I met at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. And since then, I was really interested what he was doing because it was always extremely interesting work. I strongly recommend everyone to check what those guys are doing. And lately, or already maybe a couple of years ago, together Michal and Michal started to investigate very specific spaces and places maybe connected to global and international transport. And this is when I also got in contact with Michal Hieslmair. And I mean, since then I was really wondering, what great research it is. Actually, this is not a first time that we have an exhibition in Czech Republic about these kind of spaces and transit nodes and so on. There was already one exhibition in Viper in Prague, but I think this exhibition is in a way special. I think it tackles the whole topic from a little bit different perspective. So if anyone knows what happened in Prague, then you can compare. And maybe from what kind of perspective I will ask Michals to explain us.
A little now, the team who worked on the Teal Cities for the Gallery Viper will be here in January to discuss for a discussion with tracing spaces. So keep updated.
Yeah, it was from me. Thank you.
I'm sorry, we speak to the microphone that it's recorded, not that you can hear us better. So hopefully you hear us. That's why we stand here, because there's some wall at the back. It's a rather good microphone, so it's really a pity that we don't have amplification. Anyway, as had already been introduced, this was a research project under brackets, because we started to collaborate in 2005 on a project that was related to mobility already, that was dealing with labor migration in the Austrian Alps, seasonal labor, in the ski resorts of the Austrian Alps, where the jobs are rather badly paid and of long term with very small leisure, if at all. Austrians are not working voluntarily anymore, so therefore, since quite a long time, so therefore they need workers from low-wage countries. And at that period of time, there was an interesting shift that people from the former east of Germany started to migrate or commute to the Alps and back again. And that was our first collaboration that then was expanded to other kinds of nodes of transnational mobility and migration. For example, a very famous or unfamous gas station or highway service station in the middle of Austria, which is located on the so-called Gastarbeiter route. That is the highway that is connecting the northwest of Europe with the southeast of Europe, and where hundreds of thousands of Turks and former Yugoslavs are traveling, then Romanians and Bulgarians are traveling to their new homes in the northwest, Germany especially, and Benelux and France, or even Britain. And our theory was that is not, you know, for application of projects in the field of art, you have to write only one and a half page paper that is easy. But, and so we claimed that these places are underestimated or they don't receive the recognition they should deserve because they're so important for so many people that stop regularly on the roads, on the routes. They exchange each other. They meet even friends. Some older people living in villages close highway service stations used to go for dinner on the highway service station because the pub in the village already closed or is too boring. So there's much more going on than one might expect. And we figured out that in the field of art world, there is some sort of disastrous aspect of subsidizing us or financing art projects. Usually when an art project is set up, you can apply or you're invited and you get a decent amount of money for producing something. And usually when the project opens, there is an opening and a party, and then everybody's happy that all the artists leave. And we figured out that with our kind of projects on highway service stations, so in a social field that is far away from the art world, the interesting things happened not before you build up your artwork, but after the art, or while the artwork is built up. But then when the artwork is finished, we are sent away and we have no idea how the people react on our work. And then some strange thing happened, that there was a new scientific branch invented, art-based research. And we were asked by the Academy if we want to apply for a research project. That means that we have more than 10,000 euro and we're not sent back home after the opening. And we can do more research than 3 weeks. So we can actually live from that amount of money for 2.5 years if we calculate accurately, which we of course didn't do. And then we said what we learned from these highway service stations is, or from these nodes where people mingle and meet, is that in a network, in a transport network or in a traffic network, there's never ever one node alone. It always needs a second one and a third one and a fourth one, because people are driving from A to B and probably they stop at place C. So place C would never exist if there wouldn't be an A and a B, and the people would not travel if they wouldn't pick up something on place A and deliver it to place B. Might it be other people or goods of different kind? And so we said, if you want to do a research project, we don't want to investigate one place. But for example, if you start in Vienna, which was part of the program that Vienna has to be involved, so it was an Eurocentric, Vienna-centric funding project funded by the city of Vienna. So you can't make a project telling them that Vienna is of no importance. So we said, interesting, why is Vienna so rich? Why are we enjoying this living quality in Vienna? We enjoy this living quality because we have so many low-paid people that are cleaning our homes, that are nursing our grandmas, that are doing all the services that the Austrians don't want to do. And these people are usually coming from other regions, not necessarily by plane, because this is far too expensive, but not even by train, because train lines in large part of the post-communist world were not established, more or less first disinvested, and then with European Union money started to be sort of brought up on the track, but far too late, because in the meantime everything was done by private bus companies, like the famous yellow bus from Bratislava to Vienna that was run by the former student agency that privatized itself. And in the Balkan you will find 100 bus lines driving from each village to the centers, under brackets, in the former Western Europe. And on the other hand side, a lot of our production, as you all know, is outsourced to low-wage countries, and goods are brought from there. And these people who are traveling all these long distances, of course, build up their own networks aside of the networks of the company. So we were arguing that there is a layer, there are several layers of networks existing simultaneously. Many of them started to exist in communist times and survived the collapse of communism. Austria is so rich because it had been a monarchy before, and we have all these people from the former countries of the monarchy in Vienna, which we just sent back. You know, if the Germans send a bank manager to one of the Balkan countries who behaves typical Prussian and wants to have a contract within 5 minutes, there will be never any contract. If we Austrians send some Serb back to Serbia, he knows how it works, so he has the cultural competence to make business. And therefore we applied that we want to make a project where we travel all these routes ourselves by car, so that we get embedded in the field. Actually, we wanted to purchase we wanted to rent a car, which pulls a trailer, which is our drawing kit for making mapping exercises in the field, on the street, on the stops, anywhere. Interestingly, no professional car rental wanted to rent us a car if we go to Baltic countries or Romania and Bulgaria or Ukraine, because there's basically no insurance covering the risk of the car being lost. Therefore, we had to purchase a car, which we still own, a Ford Transit, a very big one. So it was not our choice, but then at the end we thought, the name is the program, Ford Transit. Our Ford Transit reminds us on my parents' hippie times when they used to go camping with cars like that. Actually, our modern 2008 built Ford Transit was manufactured in Turkey already, so nothing with England and Germany. It's a typical, it's a Turkish car with bad German-English technology. But anyway, it's the cheapest of that type of car. And it was quite funny, our experience, that the Slavic people on the road all laughed at us, that we from rich Austria cannot afford to purchase a serious car, because a serious car is a Mercedes Sprinter. This is a car. Or a Fiat Iveco van. So we had really such a kind of poor people car driving around. And the car was very important, because when you're on the road and you meet people and you tell them, oh, sorry, we're doing a research project about that and that issue, people would say, pfft, and do not want to talk to us. But if you have the same type of car, you can start to talk about problems of the car, what you're loading. Of course, as beginners at the border stations, we failed. So 5 boys with more experience helped us how to cross the border and how to bribe the custom officers, or how to pay fees, so that we can move on. So actually the car was more or less the trigger for communication on Austrian side. Then we told them some stuff, and then we got involved in having beer or exchanging fireplace myth stories of transnational mobility experience. Anyway, and we said as an argument, since most of you are from the field of architecture, we learned in our romantic perception of bourgeois Marxist theories that urban space is a space, in most cases in a city, where people meet and mingle and actively discuss with each other about political issues and anything. Interestingly, this notion, this idea of the public space was invented by super rich leftist bourgeois people from Frankfurt School of Philosophy that were really affluent, and they were referring to the Greek agora as the model. A society where women had no rights at all, and where only 10% of men of rich men were part of the so-called democracy of that time. So we said that, we argued that from the point of view, because the call of the program where we got the money was called public spaces in transition. So we said, as an argument, we should speak about other kind of public spaces than these public spaces in the cities, which everybody knows and everybody deals with already. If people, and there are hundreds of thousands of people, if they spend 90% of their lifetime on transnational highways, driving there and back, transporting goods and people, for these people, the city is of a minor importance in their life. The city is a place usually much too expensive for spending their leisure time. For them, the major place of habitation is the street itself, their car and the highway stops where they stay overnight or where they do some smuggling, dealing, etc. So the public spaces of today that are overlooked by most of the researchers are these spaces at the street side. And if people are traveling from Tallinn, Helsinki to Vienna and back, or from Vienna to Turkey and back, then of course we should investigate the whole route from Vienna to the Turkish-Bulgarian border, even further, of course, which would have totally exploded the scope of research. And the other way. The funny thing was that we failed with our application at all the art funds, at all art-based research funds. And then we got invited by the academy, we should apply at the normal research fund of social science and humanities, because our program fits there much better than with art. And we had some experience before with a specific academic school of mobility studies, which is based in Lancaster in the UK, invented by John Urey, who sadly is dead already, who started as one of the first to take streetscapes serious as lived spaces. So they started to do some sort of critical geography and anthropology of the streetscapes connecting places. There were no architects involved. Graphic representations were really bad in this academic field. But they try to get close to the people who are traveling and stopping and exchanging. For graphic representation, for those who studied architecture, you should know that there is a very famous couple in the history of architecture, Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, who started to make it fashionable in our field to do investigations of streets. This is the project called Learning from Las Vegas, which we showed in the front room outside where there's a lot of light on the tables. You can see the original design of the, let's say, very famous booklet they produced after a studio program at Yale University, where Robert Venturi, the godfather of postmodern architecture theory, and his later wife and partner, Denise Scott Brown, who also was a studied anthropologist, went to Las Vegas, the famous casino town, and had an idea to investigate the street, the so-called strip of Las Vegas, in, let's say, urbanistic terms. So the students had to make photographs, the students had to make diagrams, drawings, etc., etc. So they had to make a real, very accurate, let's say, excavation of the history and presence of the Las Vegas Strip, and with all the places and places to mingle. The interesting thing is that they were architects, real architects, and in contrast to Denise Scott Brown's expectation, the students were so excited about the project that they forgot to speak with people. So it was just a graphic analysis of a streetscape. And so we argued that we should expand on that streetscape idea, but bringing in the social experience of the people. And somehow not inspired by Venturi Scott Brown. So the first part of this exhibition here is this kind of series of photographs on the back wall in the fenced-in room, where you can see specific places alongside our route from Vienna to anywhere. And another very fashionable term in the field of architecture is the so-called non-place. So when I studied, or at the end, later on, we learned from the French anthropologist Marc Auger that there are places with history that are the good places, and there are evil places which are totally without history. This is totally wrong, because every place has history, and every place knows people, or people know the place, and inscribes his own experience into the place if you just wait long enough on the site. So when Michael made his diploma work, he was speaking about a railway hub in Vienna, and he was arguing that all the people that are just running around in high speed and have no time to build up any relation with the place. This is true if you just observe them from a distance, but if you stand there, if you stay there for a longer time, you figure out that there are people even living in stations. As you know, that there was a famous Iranian person who's died recently who was living in Schiphol airport for several years. And there are people who are working there regularly, or there are at least people coming there, walking the dog. So at least the dog and the owner of the dog has a very strong relationship to specific bushes where the dog uses to pee, for example, or with animal friends that they might meet. And so whatever you see in the photographs there has a strong history inscribed for those people who can read them and who have been there for a while and experienced something. So there is a very attractive photograph to the left. You see the gas station that was dismantled and transformed into a Roma palace. It's one of the fancy restaurants alongside the road in Romania. In the middle, there's a strange bus on a pickup truck. That is a street sign indicating that behind this bus is a shelter for truck drivers with accommodation, parking lot, car repair, and even sex work offered, etc. So this is just so the tease of the exhibition. And then, interestingly, we learned that we should give up all this national organization and all the mapping is evil, and all Europe is a post-colonial power structure. But for a representation in an exhibition, especially here that it's so large, the space, we thought we should display our research in a geographical order. So you are now standing, under brackets, in Bulgaria. So this is our research finding from Bulgaria. So it's not the research finding from Bulgaria. These are the objects that we collected in Bulgaria. Because we had such a big van, we decided that we do not only speak to people, we just also load our van with whatever we thought is interesting on the road. And because we consider ourselves also to be artists, but we would never ever say that we are the first one to do this research, because everywhere where we go, there might have been another artist already doing research or another scientist. So we purchased books as you used to do. We read some of them, not all. Sadly, we had no students who could be tortured to read the books and make, presentations so that the teacher doesn't need to read it because it gets presented a short introduction. So we still have a lot of books we have never read. But we also collected material. And what you can see here is a collection. You could say this is the museum of Somat company. Somat was, in communist times, the monopolist transport company of Bulgaria. So a state-owned company that was the only company that was allowed to travel abroad to the West, to the traditional West, let's say the capitalist Western countries, and also to the East, Far East, which was more Western than today. So the Bulgarian truck drivers were transporting goods from Bulgaria to Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Northern Africa, for example. And on the other hand side, they were transporting goods or bringing them from Austria, Germany, France, Great Britain, etc. They were actually, that's no joke, that is what we learned by reading other stuff. They controlled 50% of all the transport. So it was the most powerful transport company in Cold War times, bringing things from the real West, passing through Austria, which is half Western, through Yugoslavia, which is half communist, to Bulgaria, which is full communist, and then being distributed in communist realm or being transported further to the more capitalist sphere of the early times. And in this vitrine, you find a collection of smuggled goods that a truck driver of the 80s had smuggled. On one hand side, because he loved to have jeans from the West and leather jackets from Istanbul, but also records and cigarettes from the West. So the kids of the truck drivers at that time in Bulgaria were the best dressed people in the school because their fathers could bring in whatever they wanted. They were never ever controlled at the Bulgarian border because the secretary of the Communist Party also wanted to have Western goods smuggled. So therefore, this was a really great time. And here you can see we had we picked up by accident a Bulgarian photographer whom you might easily find because he's running a kind of online blog about communist modernist architecture. And we made an exhibition like this, what you can see here, in the cantina or canteen of this company. So Sumat doesn't exist anymore in the same scale as in communist times, but the former headquarters and the canteen still exists. So we went there, you can still get all these fat truck driver meals there, but you also find old men with their grandsons showing them where they worked once upon a time. And then we got somehow friends, thanks to Nikola Mihov, with the last clerk working for that company. And then she more or less handed us over the whole visual archive of this company. So this is a poster of communist time where the Bulgarian truck company is showing the map they somehow control. This is a commercial video, or let's say a video where they praise themselves of being the connector to all the world, not only from Bulgaria outside, but also between the countries. This is a private archive photograph from a Bulgarian truck driver when he had been in southern Kuwait and made a photograph of himself, or not himself, of his truck, below these water towers that were built by a very, very famous Swedish company in the late 70s, early 80s. This is a kind of trophy. This is showing the borderline of Libya. So the truck driver doing the best service between Bulgaria and Libya got such a thing as a present. And these are photographs from the diverse compounds of this company. And they hired a professional photographer to make photographs of the car garage, of the signs, of the maps, even of truck drivers wearing uniforms just for the photograph, which they never used literally in the field, of language lessons that they were given or that they had to attend to, at least, which is written on this sign: truck drivers of Bulgaria, please behave nicely, you're the representative of our nation outside. So it was of some real importance for these people. And in each of we walk further to the other room. So we were traveling several times. So we decided we do not travel the major highway, each highway the same time, but we take a different street. So the very old street, the medium street, the new street. And very close to the Bulgarian-Turkish border on Bulgarian side, alongside the old street, we passed by some strange compound aside the street, which looked very bombastic and had a huge Somat logo on top. So we parked there and entered, and we found a guard who was happy to meet somebody, to talk with him, and guided us around. And later we found out this model of the very same compound we visited. So there's a gate, there's a gas station, there's a truck repair, and there's some kind of weird office building with hotel, restaurant, and discotheque, and rooms for truck drivers. That was used at the end of the Cold War times as a kind of fun palace, discotheque, nightclub, for getting as much foreign currency from tourists which passed Bulgaria, which they had to change at the border when they entered Bulgaria. And then they wanted all to get rid of the Bulgarian lev before they left Bulgaria. So they went to such kind of expensive places to waste the money before they cross over to Greece or Turkey. And I remember from my father that he stopped there several times. So after typically Balkan culture, it took us quite a long time of negotiation with this guy until he finally gave us this as part of our collection. Interesting, typically for Balkan countries, this model van was traveling to Vienna with a normal bus line in the belly of the bus. So because it took such a long time to make an agreement with him, so we didn't want to drive down again and again. So we just put it into the bus, and it was transported to Vienna, and we picked it up. So transport cost 10 euro. You know, that's the usual price. It's the same for a piece of pork that is transported and smuggled at the same time. This is how it looks today, but that is not so important. The important thing is that while we were doing investigation, sometimes we had trouble with our academic partners, that our academic partners didn't want to be part of an art project that makes exhibitions on gas stations and cantinas of old communist companies. They wanted to publish texts in prestigious academic journals, while some of the artists we collaborated wanted to make exhibitions in fancy Kunsthalle or museums or galleries and not in the field. So we were expanding our research also into what journalists did. And actually, this is a series of photographs from Thomas Grabka, who was a very, very famous German photographer. Actually, he's a war scene photographer from whom you would find photographs from all wars of the last decades. But as a side project, he also made a kind of review of minivan drivers that are transporting people from Portugal and Spain to Romania and Moldova. And so you can see here, let's say, the economic kind of use of such a van. So you have the passengers, which are the nurses that are working elsewhere for a low-wage job. But when you drive such a long distance, it's a waste of time if you only transport people. You just pack everything into the car, what is possible. And very often they also have a trailer and also transport a second-hand car that, again, is totally packed with more material. And with this experience of trucks, buses, and minivans, we thought, as skilled architects, we should make diagrammatic drawings of these vehicles. So this is what I've told you just before. This is a drawing by my colleague Michael. This is what these cars are very good at, you know. So these vehicles have no limitation. They can drive day and night all over Europe, even in cities. There's no weekend problem. So they are permanently on the road. They can carry trailers. They can be packed with smuggled goods. They can be packed with official goods. They can be also packed with spare parts. And, which is very interesting, we figured out that the truck drivers, bus drivers, and minivan drivers all have a lot of different electronic devices in their car. Because when they cross several countries, they need their own cell phone for each country, because otherwise it's a hell of work to change the SIM card. Of course, today it's no more that important, but in early times it was important. Then you have Autobahnvignette, you know, you have to pay fees for the highway. So either you have the hundreds of stickers on your window, or you have several electronic devices that let you pass through. A truck from the Bulgarian truck company of that period of time had his CB radio. They usually had a baseball bat for defending themselves in case of attack. They had repair tools, because if you have a car crash somewhere in the desert of Afghanistan, you have to be able to repair your car yourself. They have cooking and cooling facilities on board, and usually they have some sort of specific hidden compartments where they can smuggle all kind of goods, because they didn't only smuggle goods back home to Bulgaria, they also smuggled goods from Iran to Iraq, from Turkey to Bulgaria, from Turkey to Iran, and from Western countries to Eastern countries and back forth. And so, aside of their very small salary in communist times, they made an enormous additional income by smuggling. And smuggling was also the currency of bribing the custom workers. As some of you might, yeah, you're too young, but in my generation, if you were crossing the Cold War border, the tax officer would either ask for money or just take in something from the goods that you smuggle, and they should be prepared in advance to which goods you put to the front that he's happy within a few seconds and lets you pass. And this is the, let's say, the soft knowledge of all these bus drivers, truck drivers, minivan drivers, that they know exactly when which guy is at the border station, what is necessary, or when you stop by police just for fun and they can make trouble, or you have to pay them something. We had the same experience that we were stopped by Romanian police, and they just wanted to get cash. Then we offered them 50 euro because we had nothing else, and then he was totally pissed off because this is bribing. He only wanted to have 20, but exactly 20. And this is the typical bus, and that is something we didn't speak about it yet. Michael was so we also changed means of transport, because in Vienna the most interesting hub of transnational mobility for us was the bus terminal, the Vienna International Vienna Bus Terminal, and we figured out that. I also figured out when I was teaching architecture at the faculty that one of my diploma students didn't want to come back from Croatian coastline at the end of the holidays because it was so beautiful at Grandma Stacha. So she called me to ask me if she can send her diploma work by bus. And I said, what does it mean? Yeah, I just have to go to the Vienna International Bus Station at Monday at 6 in the morning and pick up the model on her booklet. I said, this is not my time. Then we agreed that her mother is picking up the stuff, and I should meet her mother at 9:30 at the cafeteria next to her office where she's working. So I was going at 9:30 to this office, and the mother of my student, which was about my age, felt a bit ashamed that the daughter doesn't come personally for the diploma, but just sends the stuff by bus. So these buses are of enormous importance. The bus drivers very often are immigrants from exactly the place where they drive the bus to and from. So in the case of our neighborhood, we have a Macedonian bus driver who drives a bus line from Vienna to Macedonia, not to the capital, because this is something the more prominent, powerful companies do, but to his hometown in the Muslimic part of Macedonia. So he has a bus like this. He doesn't have any schedule that is printed anywhere because all his clients know when the bus is leaving. So they just need to know the headphone number of the bus driver. There are more professional bus companies who stop at the international station or elsewhere, and who also stop at the international station in Belgrade and blah, 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 blah. But anyway, what is very important is, again, you have to have electronic devices, road pricing competence, chip cards, cleaning utensils, homemade food that is usually brought from the former home territories. There was, I'm not joking, at Christmas 3 years before, there was one of these buses coming from Serbia that was stopped in Vienna when he arrived in the Serbian neighborhood of Ottakring, who was filled with 50 porks. Transporting pork is not allowed across borders, so this is obviously a crime against the rules of hygienic, regulations in European Union and Austria. So the problem was what to do with these porks and with the people desperately luring for the porks for the Christmas party of the Serbian families. So the tax police made a very typical Austrian Balkan kind of solution, which wasn't a really solution. They told the truck driver, how many porks do you have? They obviously saw how many porks they were. So the truck driver then showed his social competence. He told a number that was relatively close to the real number, but not too small, because otherwise, this would become a criminal behavior. So he was lying, but not lying in a too radical way. So he was just lying that we lie every day. So that's okay for at least he confessed that he smuggled something. Then the tax police was asking, how much is one pork worth? Then he had said, again, he said some value of a Serbian price of a pork with a little bit underestimated, but not too much so that it's acceptable. And then the tax police people are writing a fee, so he has to pay the amount of money officially, but they have to go back to the office to make the real papers ready. So then they disappeared. The porks were redistributed. The tax police never came back because they knew that that this is a delicate situation that had to be solved without making trouble. Otherwise, you have 50 Christmas parties, which which do not work, and these poor fathers of the families failed in front of all the family. And so therefore it's extremely important, and it's a lot of social competence. These bus drivers are like, you know, they're also driving not only diploma works and porks, they're also driving old grandmas from A to B without attendance. They are driving grandchildren totally alone over 1,000 kilometers. So they're in charge of all kind of family members, and actually the inhabitants of the buses are partly extremely close to the bus drivers. So the bus drivers are like the grand uncle of all of them. And besides, they know exactly where to stop. When Michael was driving the bus from Vienna to Bulgaria, it was stopping at the very, very famous Autogrill in Serbia, where almost each truck driver and bus driver stops. And interestingly, they were all invited for a barbecue by the bus company, while the whole belly of the bus that was filled with second-hand cars was unloaded. So nobody knows where the second-hand cars came from, but partly he was also doing import-export on a larger scale, obviously. So again, these people are probably badly paid, but they can make an side income by their social competence. And they know exactly where to stop, where they get, usually they get the food for free if they bring enough people. They know which cigarettes are the best to bribe the tax officers. Or if they are caught by the tax and they really have to pay a fee, he just has to make like this, and everybody pays voluntarily €5 so that you have, you know, the amount you have to pay as a fee collected immediately. And they have a really natural authority, of course, because they're driving the bus. So otherwise nobody could move. So for us, these peoples are the hero of the, you know, transnational road sometimes, somehow. And then some strange things happened. We never had the time to make photographs because driving all the time, doing investigations, speaking to people is a different job than making photographs, because for making photographs of films, you have to be balanced, you have to take care of your equipment, you have to go in a larger distance or in a closer one, depending on how which photographic language. So we asked a Bulgarian artist from Vienna to do a photo reportage of the Bulgarian road, which turned out to be extremely funny, because like our colleague, this Bulgarian photographer, Max Pramatarov, didn't have a driving license himself. So he asked his own father, he should drive him around Bulgaria to find all these notes where the interesting places alongside the street. His father was totally excited about it, because he could meet all his old buddies all over Bulgaria with his poor son. You know, this son is studying art in Vienna, and he's far away from this male culture of earlier times. So Papa and his friends had been drinking a lot and a lot of fun, while the son was almost collapsing all the time, because this was really hard stuff, and he was desperately trying to make photographs. And he also made beautiful photographs. This is the booklet. But he also collected these weird concrete pieces. So these are no art pieces, but you can see in the booklet, these concrete yellow things are mounted aside the street of the old road when you enter from Turkey to Bulgaria. So when you cross the Turkish-Bulgarian border, in the next village, on each tree, there is such a strange thing hanging, and it is an advertisement for "We sell green cheese." Because as a Bulgarian truck driver, or European truck driver, if you come back from Iran, Iraq, blah, 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 Turkey, you're desperately luring for a real homemade yellow cheese. You know, we had to eat for 3 weeks white cheese in this sort of with this strange taste. And of course, you're desperately luring for alcohol as well. So alcohol is something to smuggle the other way around. And it was very interesting, because first you think, what a bad joke. But I have studied in Netherlands for 2 years. And whenever I drove, so food is very bad in Netherlands, or at least from my point of view, it was very bad. And whenever I drive home to my parents, or back home to Graz, where I studied, to my friends, already in Bavaria, I was leaving the highway to some typical southern Bavarian highway service station, because they had this beer, and they had this Leberkäse and sausage and stuff. And it's desperate. It is true that it's, you know, it's making you feel home. The more unhealthy, the better it was, because the more home I felt. And the same is true for these people who are traveling. That's why, and besides they don't have a lot of money if they fail in smuggling, but they transport a lot of food with them as well. And food is partly currency and partly, it's kind of psychological medicine. As you all know, chocolate, it helps very much if you're depressed. If you eat too much chocolate, you probably do not get out of depression anymore. And this is something we also collected. So somebody told us that there is some artist somewhere who made an interesting work about Bulgarian border landscape. And so we invited her to participate, but we failed. Veselina Nikolaeva studied in Netherlands art and made a beautiful photo book about the former communist military control points alongside the border to Turkey with these photographs. And we wanted to convince her that she should go there again 6 years later when they're building a fence. Because at that time, when Bulgaria joined the European Union and became a Schengen border, and let's say the political tensions to Turkey had been low, they started to dismantle all the border control. So the people at these military compounds were all depressed because they got more or less useless. But a few years later, they started to reinforce the border, and it became the best protected border, except of the corruption as a technology to cross it anyway. But from architectonic point of view, it would have been great. But she didn't want to do anything new because this is a typical architect's habit, you know. Not architect, sorry, artist's habit. This is my work. This is my work. This is my work. Architecture students at least are more flexible because they say, okay, it's outdated, but people are interested. If you pay me, I would drive there again and do something which fits to the current situation. But this is extremely difficult with real artists. And we go further. This is a very funny movie, actually. It's a movie by a professional filmmaker, Boris Despotov, also from Bulgaria, living abroad in Germany, actually. And he made a movie about a new highway that was planned to be built connecting Bulgarian Black Sea with the Albanian Mediterranean. Actually, the highway is still not finished. And in this movie, a lot of experts are talking about the planned highway. As you know, we all learned that if you build new streets and new rail connections, and if we tear down all the borders between nations, people will start to love each other and meet each other, and we will have a happy European Union. And they all argue that we don't want to have borders teared down, we don't want to have new streets, because we are all living from the border economy, because we are the smugglers, or we are the people that are working at the tax office. So in each family, as in each village around one of the famous borders situations in Europe, almost in every family, one person works at the border station and another family member is one of the major smugglers. So this is important for them to survive. On the other hand side, the slower the traffic, the more the cars stop and go to the pub, for example, of Aunt Mitzi, which is this restaurant, the grill. And there are also very funny side economies that the street is in extremely bad condition, sometimes even made worse by the locals. So a lot of cars have car damage and need to be repaired. So you find a lot of repair shops also close to some border stations. And here they all are arguing why they don't want to have the road. And they're lucky somehow that Bulgaria and Albania are so corrupt that it never ever will happen anyway. And strangely, this turned out to be true. So if I as Austrian are denouncing Bulgarians for corruption, it's a bit colonial behavior. But if a Bulgarian filmmaker lets Bulgarians and Albanians talk about their own corruption and how happy they are that corruption prevents modernization, so that they can continue with their lifestyle and their income anyway. So we continue. So when we so we did not join the truck drivers ourselves, because we were busy driving our Ford Transit, and we were driving the bus one time or two times, but we were also driving planes, for example, because we wanted to see how the very rich Austrian managers who exploit these countries with their companies are traveling and which nodes they have. But that was far too much of different issues. But then we invited another friend of us, Gabi Sturm, because she did that several years before. She was traveling several times with Turkish truck drivers from Turkey to Vienna and back to accompany his transport of famous Turkish tomatoes to Austria. And this is only the rest of her installation, because she made a huge tomato installation with some sort of tomato plantage in the gallery, and also a nice video together with the truck drivers where they explain her how that business runs. And when we had been in Bulgaria doing investigations, we had typically, you know, if you're an artist or architect, urbanist, and you go to some specific place, you first ask some of your academic friends who are from there if they know somebody who can help you. And interestingly, in each of these places, you find exactly the same people that are sent to you to assist you. So all the people that I know who had been in Tallinn had the same people that helped them. The people who had been in Sofia got the same ones. And it was interesting that when we were investigating the Bulgarian truck company Somat, it turned out that a very famous Swiss theater group named Rimini Protocol had been in Bulgaria for several years before us. And they also made a project about Somat company, but they used their research for a theatrical performance that they did. So their project is organized like that they purchased, so they are a theater company in a higher level of art festivals or theater festivals. So it was a co-production of 5 cities, 5 theaters, and they purchased a huge truck, and they transformed the backside of the truck into an auditorium where the people were sitting, and then they were traveling around one city, Sofia, for example, pretending as if they were traveling around whole Europe. And the truck drivers had a microphone, and there were loudspeakers in the back of the truck, so that the audience watching just Sofia on one side passing by could listen to the truck driver's fictitious dialogue about traveling from Turkey through Bulgaria to Germany and crossing borders and seeing that and that. And that is what is shown on this video. And they made that piece in 5 European cities, expanded another year, another 5 years, and even showed their piece in Indonesia and elsewhere for theater festivals. So actually they hired these 2 Bulgarian truck drivers for 2.5 years. So they earned more working for a theater company than earning officially when they work for a truck driving company or transport company in Bulgaria. And as you can see here, they also had this kind of screen with some subtitles, but it's too long, you can study it anyway. Then since we didn't make photographs ourselves, and I told you that we sent the Bulgarian photographer to Bulgaria, then we sent the German photographer to Poland. And what is going wrong in Bulgaria, or going right, depending on the position? In Poland is the world champion in European money spending. So Poland is the country with the highest density of super modern highways. It is absolutely incredible how many highways they have and how expensive they are built. So there are no mountains, or almost no mountains. at least not at the major routes, but they had built so beautiful highways. It was really exciting for us. It's, of course, totally boring driving these highways. But anyway, so we sent a friend of us there, and our friend is a typical artist with this sort of hypercritical view to transport, transnational mobility, and global capitalism. And so he made these very beautiful photographs of highway service stations and highway crossings from a very distant point of view. So they all look like that nobody ever would meet there, which is, as I mentioned before, bullshit, because of course at daytime the truck drivers have to drive trucks. So they are driving, that's their job. At nighttime they have to think about where to stay overnight. And then these places are totally transformed, but our friend never stayed overnight at this service station, so he never met people when they, appropriate the space and make it their second home or the third home or the 52nd home or 55th home. On the other hand side, when we were driving through Poland, or when we had been in Tallinn actually first, in Tallinn at the time when we did the research, there was a very famous Russian market that this doesn't exist anymore because it got gentrified and substituted by a very beautiful shopping mall with a sort of domestic-sized, fancy, let's say, zoo for Russian vendors in showcases. But originally, over 30 years, this was a relatively wild, under brackets, self-organized market for deprived Russians that were selling all kind of goods. And we thought naively, they will all bring their goods from Russia, and because it's cheaper there, and sell it to the rich Baltic people for a reasonable price. Of course, some communist Soviet army souvenirs, but vegetables and clothes, etc. But it turned out that almost all of the vendors were purchasing their goods south of Warsaw at a huge Asian wholesale market, whose name is Wolka Kosowska, and it's a very famous place. And so we were driving there ourselves. We figured out it's a really great place, but we have no time to open up another research branch. So I was asking if another former student of mine, isn't it true that you're from south of Warsaw? And do I remember correctly that your grandma lives nearby Wolka Kosowska? Yes, and would you mind if you would have a visit there and do some photo reportage and more? And so she started to make a kind of, demographic analysis of the growth. Originally, the market was at the football stadium. When the World Championship of Football started, all the market was destroyed and a new stadium built. So it started in the south of Warsaw as a Chinese wholesale market with one warehouse. After the opening of the football World Championship, it was already a very huge compound, growing further and growing further. And today it is an extremely interesting mix of Vietnamese, Turkish, and Chinese vendors that are selling everything. Then she also found a video of the opening where the Prime Minister is proud to open a Chinese market because it is re-establishing the good relations of not communist, but of Poland and China. And this is the typical vehicle that vendors use when they're driving around their warehouses, because their warehouses are so large that you cannot walk, it's too large. And they transport the goods with this trolley. From Bulgaria, we go to the very north. I want to have you look on this photograph because it shows a very strange urban situation. It's not so strange, but from a romantic Middle European point of view, it's a bit shocking. Tallinn is a relatively rich city at the seaside, and as you can see, the old town of Tallinn is just this small. And there's a large modernist town around, where a lot of the Russian people of Estonia live in modernist housing compounds. But the major reason for the income is this horrible concrete landscape of the harbor, because what Tallinn is mainly living from is the daily commuting or weekly commuting, on one hand side, from people from Estonia who go for work in rich Finland, and for comparably rich Finns who come to Estonia for mainly drinking alcohol as much as possible in the shortest period of time, or getting to repair their teeth because it's so cheap, or to go shopping. But very close to the ferryboat terminal is a really extremely dense agglomeration of markets that are selling nothing else than alcohol. And they have a logo calling super alcohol. So when the Finns are coming by the ferry boat, they can pre-order alcohol. So then they walk to the old town, get drunk, walk back to the ferry boat, and pick up their trolley with alcohol and go on board. And this, what you can see over here, is the typical trophy of a Finnish male person when he comes back from Tallinn. Here we made an estimation. So what you can see here, if it's full with alcohol, it costs only 132 euro. It would cost in Finland 390, so 3 times as much. So for the Finns, this is legitimation. So this is very rational, you know. I save so much money that finances my trip and even more. So even the alcohol that I drink during the trip and many other things. So it's a win-win situation. The only problem that we had, so we purchased exactly the same because we wanted to show it to you. Luckily, sadly for you, most of the alcohol is already drunk because we showed them very often. And whenever we had reception in our own space, we offer Tallinn-based drinks. Especially these vodka lemon combinations are very dangerous for getting totally drunk. But anyway, the interesting thing is that this is driving economy. And for our Finnish partner, this was a very complicated situation because, you know, if you want to be a very fancy critical urban researcher, and in your city, the issue is alcohol and ferry boat, this is nothing being compared with post-socialist history of truck company in Cold War time or in what happened in Vienna later. So somehow he had some trouble with that. Besides, we thought he's a critical geographer, so he's the best expert for making beautiful maps together. But it turned out that especially geographers don't want to make maps because for them, being critical means also to being critical towards mapping and maps. While we argue that mapping is the best device in the street. So we built up billboards and started to draw something. The people are asking, what are you drawing? Then say, we're drawing the mobility pattern of some market vendor. We'll see that later. And once they recognize what you're doing, they want to tell you their story. So this is a very good device to get into contact. But our original first item of interest was this one. So as most of you, I think, we grew up in a country which had no access to seaside. So for us, seaside is something special. That is why almost half of Austria is going to the northern Italian coastline and northern Croatian coastline in summertime, or at lakes, but the lakes cannot compete. And when we had in Tallinn harbor, in this concrete wasteland, we saw a sign like this one, much higher mounted, and we thought this is really sexy sign. It shows how complicated it is to bring all these things onto their ships, you know, because they'll have to line up, even if they have to line up in 12 lines, you know, that they can place them all in this huge parking lot. Half of them are drunken already, so this is really difficult, you know, how to board them, and you have to think they drive over to Finland, and they have to get off the boat in such, with the help of such diagrams, and nothing happens. So this is a miracle. But for us, it was also interesting for graphic reasons and for architectural reasons, because this is the best diagrammatic view of what urbanism can be as well. Of course, the people don't come with bicycle by boat and drive drunken through Tallinn and back. So we wanted to steal this originally, the whole sign, but then we thought I think it's part of how we number plate and the sign. climbed up the original sent it back and found a label of the company, called the company, what would it cost to reproduce exactly that sign? Which sign? Yeah, that sign we have photographed. It costed 128 euros or something like that. It was extremely cheap. It was extremely cheap, and therefore we just reproduced it. So the next time we came to Tallinn, half a year later, we packed this into our car and brought it back. Our Tallinn friends in plural were totally confused. What is so interesting on this sign? And we told them, you have no idea. You know, we don't have seaside. We don't have a harbor. Ferry boats don't exist in our country. This is so exciting. And from the point of architectural theory, again, something serious, Austria is the homeland of a very important person for the visual culture of our business. His name is Otto Neurath. He was a social democratic philosopher, sociologist, and economist who invented the so-called universal language and the pictogrammatic language of simplified icons. So whatever you make in your plans as a little icon is based on the 1920s in Vienna, when Otto Neurath, as member of the Socialist Party, together with a very talented German graphic designer or artist, Gerd Arndt, developed this kind of language. Originally not for making street diagrams, but originally for explaining global economy to people in the 20s, for convincing them to join the social democratic movement. Today it's a diagrammatic language for all kinds of devices, and thanks to Rem Koolhaas, it became extremely fashionable in the field of architecture in the 80s or 90s. Then we walk into this cage here. Not in the cage, first outside of the cage. Coming back to some urban theory, or it's not urbanist theory, but it's theory somehow. This was the photograph we used as a title photograph for our project, because it's so nice, but nobody understands what it's for. You can see several trucks lined up, and a family passing by trucks. So this is totally absurd. What is this family doing in the vicinity of these parked trucks? Actually, this is a family from southern Baltic states looking for a second-hand car from Central Europe or from Western Europe, and they go to visit a second-hand car market where at the early times after the fall of communism, the cars were sold directly from the trailer. So the cars were not put on the street. They were really, this is the presentation of the cars, how they arrive on the car market, and you point to this car and say, I want to have this one. So after the fall of communism, there was such a lack of cars affordable for the people that cars were collected all over Western Europe and brought to specific car markets. And the two most important car markets that survived until today are the car markets of Dimitrovgrad in Bulgaria and the car market of Mariampolye in Estonia, so the southern Lithuania. And we knew about the car market because a very famous German historian called Karl Schlögl wrote a book about the reunification of Europe from below. So he was arguing that Europe didn't need any institutions like European Union for the people to meet each other. It was the poverty of different regions and the lack of goods that activated the people to supply each other themselves. And for Karl Schlögl, Mariampolye is the secret capital of Europe, because there the vendors from the West, or the vendors from Baltic countries, from Poland, as you can see here, they used old industrial compounds. They were totally filled with cars and trailers, sold to private people, but also sold to professional car vendors, which resold them to be exported from there to the whole post-Soviet era region, because in this place there's a rail track connecting to Russia and further. So this is the major hub where what is a bit different to explain today, you know, where Russians, Ukrainians were together dealing and exporting cars, purchasing them from the Baltics, where the Baltics had purchased them before, from Polish, which purchased them in Germany, for example. And again, of course, this car market wouldn't exist if there wouldn't be in a car market of a similar kind, not that big, in Germany, for example. So in Ruhrgebiet, in Essen, there is another huge car market. So today, these car markets are not that important anymore because there's a saturation of car supply. You know, Slovakia and Czech Republic have enough cars already, so people do not desperately need second-hand cars, which are really old. Some of them need them still, but there is a saturation. So the car market is moving further eastward and eastward. And these photographs are not done by us, but we met an artist, or we didn't meet him first. So somebody told us there is this artist Mindaugas Kavilauskas who devoted 20 years of his lifetime after the fall of communism just making photographs of car markets. So you could say he's a really mean guy or something, silly guy who is just photographing cars. But he said for especially the male generation, but not only male people of his generation, cars had been the one and only thing to have in life. Of course, you want to have a computer and the TV set, etc. But on the other hand side, cars are also devices for mobilizing yourself, or at least for having the illusion that you can travel far distances, because probably you can't afford the diesel or gasoline. But for many, the car is a device for going to work. And especially if you purchase minivans, so we also found a special market for minivans. This is the car which you need to earn money. So now we go to this sort of prison. So this shouldn't be very special to you, because you're hopefully be skilled in drawing. For example, this drawing we made, originally we had much larger displays which we mounted on our car. And then we were asking the people on the Russian market where this politically incorrect question, where are you from? Something that you're not allowed to ask in our sphere anymore. But it's something I was brought up to, and people also ask me, where are you from? Because when I come back home visiting my parents, and people meet me, and they say, you're speaking slightly the dialect of our region, but I don't know you, then they will ask you, where are you from? Actually, they want to know your family name, because they say, you're the grandson of blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so we were asking them where they're from. Of course, if it's a Russian market, they're all from Russia, logically. So they told us from where did they, when and why, and by which means of transport did they arrive in Tallinn. Where do they live in Tallinn? Usually they live far outside in some housing estates. Where do you purchase your goods that you sell on the market, and where on the market do you do that? And so we asked several people, and after a while this drawing got so densified that nobody could read them anymore. So we had to make several drawings and separate them from each other. And because our drawing boards were extremely large, they were so difficult to carry that it didn't work anymore. So we, by accident, we drilled holes inside and made these little booklets out of them. So you can compare Bulgarian investigation with the Tallinn investigation with another investigation and so forth. And it turned out to be a very nice item for exhibiting. But since we are also more connected to a more artsy world, this looks like research. It still looks like research. And the art world is very posh and very arrogant. So if it's looking too much like scientific research, it can't be real art. Even if all the people are speaking about trans-border or transdisciplinary work, at the end, it doesn't work. If you want to become a serious scholar, you have to publish as many texts as possible. If you want to become an artist, you have to have exhibitions in institutions of art. So we have several, so at least myself, I have several CVs, so I always ask the people, which CV do you have? CV with publications, CV with questions, because it's a qualification and a disqualification at the same time. So if you had made too many art exhibitions in your career, you would never ever get a scholar job because you're an artist and you're not serious. If you would have too many art publications, nobody takes you serious in art because he's a theoretician. So, and sadly, this still works. So when we have art exhibitions, we make such posh stuff, you know. with frames and a bit of passepartout. So these are of course still very architectonic diagrams, drawings. Here you can see the harbor of Tallinn with 2 ships approaching, trucks lining up, hotels, people running around, tax office, and logo of super alcohol. And normally this image would be parked next to this trolley with the alcohol so that it makes more sense. This is a drawing of a second-hand car market in Dimitrov, Bulgaria. This is a drawing of the border station of Nickelsdorf. This is the Austrian-Hungarian border. Because while we were doing our project, investigating bus travel, this wave of refugees of 2015 happened, and we could not ignore that anymore. This would be totally bullshit. But while this sort of strange thing happened at the border station, we had been in Tallinn. And the interesting thing was then that the Hungarians, under this famous prime minister, they just want to kick out all refugees and send them by train to Austria. Then the train was stopped at Nickelsdorf border station, and then they had hundreds and thousands of Syrian and non-Syrian refugees at the border station, which was locked down since several years because there was no border anymore. And then the Austrians started also to pack them into trains and buses and bring them as fast as possible to Germany, because the German prime minister said, we will make that. But then the Bavarians, which are not the same as the Germans, typical tribe of Germans, locked the border to Austria. So then the Austrians had a sort of super crowd of refugees where they didn't know what to do. And in that period of time, they decided to organize bus trips to bring the people on the road, not necessarily somewhere, but on the road, because originally these hundreds of thousands of people were arriving at the Vienna train station. For technical reasons and insurance reasons, the train station should have been locked down because there are too many people. They would risk their life, falling on the train tracks, etc. And it turned out that the atmosphere in Austria wasn't only friendly towards refugees, but also rather hateful from the other side. So they decided to make it more silently, to use buses, picking up the people at the train station and bringing them to the west of Austria, very slowly, at least moving on, so that people get the feeling we're going to Germany. And while the bus is traveling slowly, telephones are ringing and people are negotiating where to bring them. Where is the accommodation, which is close to Germany, but the Germans closed the border, so we had to accommodate them somewhere. Some of them, anyway, figured out after a year that Vienna is worth living, so they returned, or even stayed, but the majority was brought away. So we didn't have a crisis of refugees then, we had a crisis how to bring them further. But anyway, as you know, that this crisis of refugee really kicked out governments at a period of time. So in Austria we had a shift from a coalition of conservative and social democratic party to a coalition of right-wing party and conservative party who used a rather aggressive tone against all kind of immigration to win one election after the other. But we go further to the Venice investigation, but what was interesting for us was that this is only a final drawing. So this is not the research itself. So this is research. This is what we also make what we produce to make ourselves happy because it looks nice, but also what you need if you want to show your pieces in a different place. Because this kind of installation here now, this is a really enormously large space. And as you can see, it's filled only with one of our projects, but thanks with the help of a lot of other artists that are involved, that were dealing with the same or similar issues. And this is actually the way we want to work. Like if you do a normal scientific work, you have to read several seminal books and you write footnotes where you give evidence that you had written the book and quote it accurately. So for us as architects and artists, we do the same architecture art. So we quote the artist, but luckily we do not quote him only as a text line, but we just take the art piece and involve it into our project. It's much better for the artist, it's also much better for us, of course. We always had all the books that are the theoretical support with us, which was very funny. For example, the first time we went to Tallinn, we went consciously to an international symposium of anthropologists and made a classic academic presentation, and then we guided all the people to our Ford Transit van and opened the door. And these all other scholars were not so much interested in our project, but in the books we had, because they wanted to know to which theoreticians we refer to. And since we didn't study anything of these subjects, we have no idea which are the must-read or no-go theoreticians. So we just read what sounds interesting. And then this becomes the problem in the discussion, how you can refer both to this guy and this guy, or this woman and this woman. Strangely, there are more guys than women. So old white men, basically, all of them, that wrote something interesting about these issues. And so it turned out that also for us, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's totally embarrassing. You know, that the academic discussion doesn't discuss what we experienced, but it discusses the theoretical references to which we refer. So, of course, we know the game. So if we are in the urban sphere in Vienna, for example, we would also refer to Henri Lefebvre, the famous Marxist theoretician, because he wrote so complicated texts that nobody understands them. So I can say anything, and no of you could compete with my say, because you should have read the same book. You must have understood it, that you can reformulate and disagree with what I say. So the more complicated the theory, the more you use it as a weapon, because. And the interesting thing is that French philosophy is not made to give you advice how you manage your life. French philosophy is a game. And this is what some people outside of France do not understand. So it's like writing a poet and throwing it on the market, and some German philosophers answer and say, this is wrong. And but Lefebvre is a serious reference in my sense, therefore I will bother you with that. So he, like Michel de Certeau, who is also very much quoted in our field, both of them hated cars, officially. Michel de Certeau, as a posh French philosopher, of course, had a very beautiful car himself privately, but officially he was against cars, especially means of transport, because they are all symbols of global capitalism, and global capitalism is evil. And he was living in Paris and had a dacha there and another dacha there. So he had a lot of trips to go from one holiday home to the next holiday home, where he wrote his texts against capitalism, being a professor at one of the most prestigious universities at the same time. So it's an easy game with that well-paid job and the heritage from his rich family. Anyway, but what he was writing is really interesting in his very last book that is not quoted very much because it doesn't fit this theory. He was having a younger assistant whom he admired very much, probably more than admired. And she brought him to dance theater, so modern avant-garde dance theater, which he didn't know before. And he was sitting in the theater hall and watching the movement of these beautiful bodies, but also body-positive bodies on stage that sometimes move, you know, in parallel, and sometimes they move into some chaotic situation, but they find each other and join the same rhythm. And he was so excited about this situation that these people are moving rhythms, unifying into one body of dancing group, dispersing again and finding each other, while he is sitting inside and gets somehow physically touched by what is going on the stage. And then he said, probably life in the city works somehow similar, that there are different bodies, like our bodies, which as a body, you know, we have different organs inside. They all work very strangely with different rhythm, have different jobs, and strangely we do not fall apart and live alive. So, you know, when you're really sick and you're in the hospital, then it turns out that your body is extremely complicated, and you will never ever understand, if you're not studying medicine, why is it working? So he said there is the individual body of these many people is a miracle already, of different rhythms working, different parts inside, work of organs with, but then there are the people themselves moving on the city, walking. So he was totally in walking, But as you know, there are also people going by tram and by bus and by bicycle and by car, and still there are not accidents every 10 seconds. So somehow this densification of people with different bodies, different vehicles, driving and walking in different rhythms works. And sometimes people meet each other or approach each other and start to talk each other. And when they feel finished with talking, they move on. And so he came up with a theory of rhythm analysis so he changed from his Marxist critique to a sort of investigation of city as a multiple network of bodies or entities that create different rhythms of meeting and moving. And we said if Michel de Certeau, if Lefebvre is right, this is also true for the network of highways that span over Europe. There are hundreds and thousands of people going with different cars, and it works somehow. So they're stopped, they stop, they mingle, start again, and they keep the world running. And the same is true also for a city, because a city needs all these people. Otherwise, if nobody takes off the garbage and brings in the stuff, it doesn't work. And the other theoretician is very much appreciated in our scene is Lefebvre, Michel de Certeau, who was also an enormous enemy of automobility. So he was arguing, as he should know, that the two gazes on the city, the one of the planner from far above, who is just perceiving the city as a diagrammatic space of statistics, which can be planned and has to be controlled. And there's the other city of those people who are walking on the ground and mingling and meeting each other. This is the real city, the social space of the city. But if we talk about highways and transnational transport and mobility, if it is true what what Michel de Certeau said about the city itself, then it must be true again about the network of traffic corridors. Of course, I can also put myself into the helicopter or police vehicle from above and control how the people are mingling up. But if I go down myself, sit in the vehicle, stop at the car station, go to a border station, to a second-hand car market, or do this ferry boat terminal, I will figure out that this is not an abstract place. This is a place loaded with hundreds of histories of the people that are working there or passing by there, experiencing something. And that is what is worth to be investigated. And as a final thing, because I bothered you with a theory, I will bring you back to Vienna, which is in the middle. So originally we started to do an investigation about the Vienna International Bus Terminal, and the government of Vienna never ever was very happy with bus terminals, because originally in the 1920s, 30s, when bus trips became modern, buses were much more expensive than today, and it was the hottest shit on earth to go with a modern bus. So then the buses all started in the first district, in front of the travel agencies for going to prestigious trips. But after Second World War, the bus became the major vehicle of Yugoslavian and Turkish guest workers, which were no more wanted in the inner city, but had to park their buses outside. So strangely, the Vienna bus station today is under a highway bridge, a very strange, fancy place, very limited. And today it's an extremely interesting mix of low-wage service workers arriving and leaving, and of Flixbus clients of fancy destinations. But when we started our investigation, as mentioned before, this influx of refugees happened. We were first making this is another theory by an African theoretician who wrote about the urban archipelagos, that, as you might know, we don't know even our own city, because we live here, study there, have probably parents there, some sports club cafeteria restaurant where we want to go to regular, and the rest of the city is just something we pass by. And he said this is even more true in a larger scale, that even if you're doing long-term trips for professional reasons, private reasons, you know place A, place B, and in some stops intermediate. So for many of the people traveling, the experience of the world is separated into archipelagos. So it might be that the person starts here with a bus, at the Vienna bus terminal, then you're sitting in the bus and you have a nap, or you listen to music, or you're on your phone, so you have no perception of what's going on around. Then strangely the bus might stop at the designer outlet, halfway from Vienna to Bratislava. And actually many buses from Romania, Bulgaria, and Serbia stop here because their clients, who are low-wage servants elsewhere in the West, stop here and waste the rest of the money for purchasing, high-end, low-price designer goods to bring back home to give evidence that they succeeded elsewhere where they worked. And then they might go further to the border station, where they were not controlled for hundreds of years. But when we had done a project, this station became of importance, and that's why we had this. That's why we had this sign here. So we came too late for the refugee crisis, but we didn't want to be some kind of voyeurists. We went there half a year later, and we were doing several trips with a bus around the former area, how they managed the problem with the mayor, with people from the NGOs, etc. And then we made drawings of the border station. And the more mistakes we had made in the drawing, the more the people started to retalk and correct us. So as a device of investigation, drawing mistakes is better than drawing it correctly. Because if you draw it wrongly, the person will tell you, no, that's not what I told you. And besides, I've forgotten to tell you that and that. So the drawing gets more and more augmented with the information of the people. So at the end, it became too complicated, and we decided we will make a more appropriate way of representation. So this was, let's say, the typical thing. We made a model of the site, we made a photograph, we made these diagrams. And then we decided that if we deal with mobility, migration, and transnational traffic, drawing is just another variation of like photography. It's a frozen image. I can make hundreds of drawings, like we made in the introduction part. Drawings, photographs, drawings, photographs, drawings, photographs. But still, it's kind of storyboard of some potential film project. But what we found more interesting was then to make a real animation movie. So as a kind of summary of the refugee crisis of 2015, we made this movie. The voiceover that you cannot hear because I'm talking now, the voiceover is a fictitious story of 3 bus drivers driving buses across the border. This is the first one before the refugee crisis. He's driving tourists from Vienna to Bratislava and back on a regular basis. There is no control at the border, they just pass by, probably go for a lunch at the border station because they have the paprika restaurant there, which is very popular for bus drivers because they get a lot of food for free when their clients would order something. So as you can see, they pass by. But when he drives back, an accident happened that a van with 40 refugees packed in the back was found next to the street with the refugees dead. This was the start of this sort of political discussion about, trafficking with this incident. And later, the next bus driver is a bus driver that is driving to the border when the refugee wave already happened. So he got stuck in a traffic jam and cannot move forward. And the last bus driver is a bus driver that is hired by the Austrian police and military service to go to this border station and bring the refugees to Germany. And the interesting thing in Austria is that almost every bus driver of the private bus companies has a background, a migration background. So almost all of them are from former Yugoslavia. In the one company, the majority is Serbian. In the other company, the majority is Croatian. And so we show in this movie the interesting thing that they used the parking lot of the former nightclub, border nightclub, something like you also know from the Czech-Austrian border, where they had these duty-free paradises and a lot of sex work and prostitution alongside. And all the buildings did still exist at that time, but since Austria and Hungary were part of the same European Union and even Schengen part, it was totally closed down. Only the restaurants were still existing. So with this refugee crisis, they just reactivated all the buildings for the management of the refugees and hired the buses to transport them. And it's quite interesting to, if you could imagine that these bus drivers had been refugees themselves in the Yugoslavian war of 92 to 98, depending on the country, escaping from the war to Austria, and then they are hired as bus drivers to bring the next wave of refugees from other war-torn countries to transport them in their fancy new buses. And it's done in English, and you can also read it. You can also visit it on our homepage, so you needn't watch it. But the interesting thing is, behind here in this video here is a video by Hieslmair, a very famous Serbian film director, who is famous for making semi-fictitious movies. In this movie, he made interviews. Now, he asked real African refugees who ended up in Novi Sad and Belgrade in Serbia in their escape to Paradise Europe. And the funny thing is that he asks these refugees that they play themselves and that they somehow express their expectation and the fulfillment of their dreams in the movie. And it's extremely funny because, like in the Bulgarian movie where everybody complains about the modernization because it will ruin ourselves, they all complain about Serbia. So because nobody told them that this is not yet the real Europe, what they expected. Nothing works here either. And they're all relatively young boys, chasing for girls, and they're totally irritated that if they proactively approach a girl, she disappears. But sometimes girls proactively approach them, then they disappear because they're so scared, because they are not used to active approaching by women. So somehow they're super young male testosterone bodies, but totally confused in the place where they landed. But most of them are totally out of money, so they spend all the money of their families already for trafficking, and they don't know how to get further because the professional smugglers ask for another 1,000 euros just for going to Hungary and Austria, which would not be very difficult actually. But the interesting thing also, what we learned also from a trafficking expert, that the refugee routes are totally detours actually, because if you go to Bulgaria, you can get on a bus and drive to Vienna directly. Interestingly, they are smuggled from Bulgaria to Serbia because they're then outside of the European Union again. So they can charge them another time if they want to enter from Serbia to Hungary again. So it's and they are all friends, these people on the border between Bulgaria and Serbia, smuggled since decades, in generations. So while the others on the other border smuggle, so they bring them just to the next sort of, let's say, economic hub where people can make money. So they don't take the direct tour. And these people who follow, a lot of these refugees just follow the information of social media. So these trafficking experts really have been extremely successful in inventing obstacles that they go on the wrong tour, so they can charge even more for their expertise. And normally this video, for example, is shown in comparison with this drawing or the larger drawing and this map, so that there are always different kinds of visual representations shown to each other. But since we had the chance that this space is so enormously big, we could, expand over the full length. Originally, we thought we would never manage the room. We have to turn out the light and only, put light on specific focuses that you are walking around in the darkness. And there's a last interesting video on this monitor related not directly to Tallinn. But when we had been in Tallinn with the seaside, of course, we came up with another idol of ourselves. Like in the entrance room, we show the diagrammatic pages of Venturi Scott Brown. This is a video by Alan Sekula, who is a godfather for the social investigation of transnational capitalism, and he made a video about the transcontinental transport on container ships, visiting several container terminals. And when we had been in Tallinn and saw the ferry boat transport, we thought, yeah, we know it's not only about cruise ship and ferry boats. The real economic factor of today and the problem of transport is the container terminal traffic. And that is something that he made. Actually, it's a very bad movie because Alan Sekula is also such a, let's say, stubborn Marxist tradition and art professor that he's always constantly complaining and knowing what is right and what is wrong in the world. But he's showing extremely beautiful images as well. And of course, whatever he tells us is the truth. And I've seen this as a film originally, and I felt quite bored by it. And then I saw it as a part of an installation. And I thought this is really great because it's producing a quite convincing atmosphere that this what we made and investigated in Vienna, Bulgaria, and Estonia is of course not limited to these three countries, but it's the principle of the global capitalism that there's a need of constantly keeping a social distance, because then you can outsource production and even import low-paid services to the rich places. So this is the rule of the game, and that's what he's complaining about. But on the other hand side, there are other theoreticians like Anna Tsing, for example, which is arguing that whenever there's an economic crisis, there's a very small chance for those people without power to establish their own structures. But when economy resettles and reorganizes itself and things get too valuable, then the people who had no power before are kicked out of the market, and let's say the old establishment takes over power. But sometimes in these situations of crisis, the structures could be theoretically reorganized, but she confesses that it's only theoretical. So that in the most cases of political and economic crisis, it is another power structure that comes up that is basically born by the old one. But anyway, we didn't want to make a project about political utopia, but about the reality alongside the street, claiming that these streets are lived spaces and spaces that make sense to people. And that is something that many people in urban studies also claim. If you just plan something, you don't plan the structure and expect the people to behave like you design them. But these people know how to appropriate spaces. They make them their own spaces for a period of time, even if they, of course, never ever built the highway themselves and never ever built the vehicle themselves. And what turned out to be very successful and the most important finding for us is that at the end of our project, we had published a book that is outside. And then somebody told us, you have to write a summary in your book. I said, why should we write a summary in your book? Yeah, this is a scientific book. In a scientific book, you have to have a summary at the end. What did we learn from our own projects? I said, yeah, it's about public space. Is there anything new you found out? And then somebody gave us the hint about some old American sociologist who said, probably we should speak about this again, this German notion of Gemeinschaft. So what is the thing? What is driving the people to do something together? What is driving people for common action? And this guy from the 1920s said, explaining why America is a state, said America is not a state. America is an agglomeration of people living on the same continent. under the same government, but they have not much in common. Common interest only raises if we have a pragmatic problem. Like we had an experience in Ukraine that the connection beam of our trailer broke down because the street was so bad. So we didn't speak Ukrainian. We had no idea what to do with a broken car in nowhere land. Some guy passed by the motorbike, saw what happened, drove to his kolkhoz, came back with a tractor, pulled our trailer to his garage, and without talking to us, repaired our vehicle. So, and that is what this tradition would call solidarity and common action, even without being able to speak. So he feels his duty and his honor that he has the skill and he will help us. He doesn't expect anything in exchange because he will never ever be able to travel to Vienna, and we will never ever be able to help him when he has a car accident in Vienna. But the same happened very often also when we were stopped at the border station, and people figured out that we have no idea how to cross the border station within the next week. So they felt committed that they should help us. And I think that this was one of the most important things we learned, that people recognize each other, that they're somehow in the same business, and they have to help each other, no matter if they're Turks, Bulgarians, Serbs, or whatever. It's part of the game. And so that's also what was making him very proud because we were the idiots who had no idea. We didn't even have the tools to repair the car ourselves. No one of low wage income would ever try without a tool set on the car. So this is something that we would say that the notion of public space is not limited to the city, and the idea of commoning is not limited to this academic discourse of saving the planet, but saving everyday problems, because you get much more people on the boat, even for saving the planet, if you can explain them that it becomes their private problem. As long as it's so abstract, it doesn't work. And actually, we had a lot of fans during our trips and a lot of visitors of our exhibitions because it was not that academic as expected. But now it was very academic. But you can spend another week inside because this is really an enormous amount of information to grasp. But if you're lazy, you can also consider it to be just a normal art exhibition with some nice visuals.